There are lots of investment options out there. Some new ones like NFT and Bitcoin, some older ones like stocks and bonds. Have I lost you already? I promise not to talk about any of them. What I will be talking about is the investment with the biggest return, investing in yourselves. Now, I know that sounds a bit like a cheesy Instagram slogan, but bear with me. Who is your biggest critic? Raise your hand if you wake yourself up in the middle of the night and beat yourself up about just about everything. My 2 a.m. critic, and for me, it's always 2 a.m., is brutal. She's unkind. She points out all of my worst faults and insecurities until there's no chance of me falling back asleep. But what if you were able to identify some of those faults and invest in making drastic improvements? What would that look like? What would you address? What would you look like? How much change is actually possible in one calendar year? If we were to have met in March of 2020, I could guarantee 3 things. 1, we'd be in a pub. 2, my elderly dog McNulty would be the opening topic of conversation. And 3, I would have been drunk. Now, I'd be a lot more comfortable up here with McNulty as my literal emotional support dog, because I'm going to lay bare a pretty painful part of my life. But by holding her and having a really adorable dog in front of me and having all of the attention on her, I wouldn't really be telling the truth about what had happened. I had lost all of the joy of drinking, the inhibition, the funny but wild stories, and I had careened into a dark and dangerous mode where friends and family were often asking me to quit. That's a really hard conversation for your friends and family to have with you, and I barely noticed. I had gone from socially drinking to self-medicating. I hadn't had a day without a glass of wine in years and years, and I had a whole lot of wine each of those days. My mother had spent 6 years dying of cancer in America, and I was straddling 2 worlds. I had been in London for 15 years. My life was here. Everything was here. My job, my boyfriend, my dog. But she was in Philadelphia, and she was dying. And I had to make a decision about whether or not I was going to go back. It was a very hard decision, but I didn't know which I could do. My 2 a.m. voice said I was worthless because I had chosen not to have babies, and that I hadn't chosen to go back to be by my dying mother's side. What does your 2 a.m. voice say to you? What is it used for prolonged attacks? And what kind of shame lingers from that when you wake up in the morning? At the time, I was drinking a lot, but I was in a pretty high-profile, high-functioning job. But then in quick succession, I took voluntary redundancy, I launched my own company, and my mother died. Losing the structure and stability of a 10-year full-time job left me adrift. I went off the rails, and I stayed off the rails for a really long time. I had completely lost my way. I don't remember a lot of that time period, to be honest, but to put it mildly, I was a hot mess. I'm a drama queen at the best of times, but I don't need to dramatize the danger I put myself in. I don't need to dramatize how fed up my friends were with my behavior. I don't need to dramatize how scared they were that I was going to end up dead or seriously injured. It easily could have happened. I had lost all perspective and could not see my way out of my grief, regardless of counseling. I often joke that I wasn't an alcoholic because I never drank alone, but there was always someone to drink with down the pub. I'm the queen of jumping into new conversations, instant best friends, and parties back at mine. When COVID hit, all of that attention dried up in an instant. I was alone, I was starved for human contact, and it was just me and McNults. I did what I thought was the only logical thing, and I ordered 2 5-liter boxes of rosé. When you're drinking out of a box, you have no idea how much you're drinking. Time of day ceases to matter. The concept of days ceases to matter. I'd occasionally wake up disgusted with myself and quite hungover, and Google detox in Thailand. We weren't even allowed to fly then. I don't know how I was getting there. Or I do one of those quizzes. Women's Mags quizzes are the best. Am I an alcoholic? If you're taking that quiz, you've got a drinking problem. It's kind of like if you're Googling, is my husband cheating on me? When you're typing that in, you know the answer, and it's not a good one. I had just lost the perspective on who I was and what I was doing. I had deep sense of shame and regret. Shame at who I had become, shame at wasted potential, and when the bars and stuff were still open, my way of dealing with that shame was to overcompensate. I was the biggest, the loudest, I really could do this without a mic, and the drunkest in the room. I was the Jamie show. But it was all tits and teeth, and it was all for show. I kind of figured if I pretended I was having the best time in the world, eventually I'd have the best time in the world again. But what happens when pretending to be happy doesn't segue into actual happiness? You get bitter. You think everyone is pretending to be happy. But really, I was the one dead behind the eyes. I spent the first month of lockdown incredibly hammered. I was just waiting for lockdown to end. This little COVID thing was just going to go away, so me and my rosé were going to be fine. And then I got really sick. I was terrified that I was dying of COVID. I was also dying of a strain of COVID that nobody else was talking about because I had a blistering rash on my chest and thigh. And I looked around, I was in a ton of pain, didn't know what was going on, convinced I was going to die. And then I was in this crappy flat. And I was alone with a dog, I was sick, I was disgusting, and all I could think was, if this is it, this is my legacy, a drunk with a dog? And how long would it take for my best friend Gina to find out? And how upset would McNulty be if she tried to rouse me? I was catastrophizing, but for once it worked. It clicked. I quit drinking April 14th of 2020 cold turkey. I don't really remember that first week, whether it was the shingles I was later diagnosed with or withdrawal. But what I do remember is making a commitment to just stop. One of the reasons I had never quit before is I was terrified that it was one more thing I could fail at. I had forgotten that I was worth that investment and forgotten to have any faith in my own convictions. Little by little, day by day, and oh my God, the days were annoyingly endless. Like if you're not drinking and you're awake for all of it. I was conscious, oh my God, it was so long. And like I read a million books, but there were not enough books to read. I just walked, and we weren't even allowed to sit down when we were walking. So I walked and walked and walked. I walked 1,000 miles to end up at no one's door. But I didn't talk about it, and I didn't tweet about it. And if you follow me on Twitter, I literally tweet about everything. But I did it, and I started to read about quitting, and I started to take little baby steps. But I really only told my best friend Gina and my boyfriend Johnny, and baby steps, but I didn't drink. Day in and day out, I existed without drinking, and was giving it a go. About a month and a half, 2 months in, I took a picture of myself outside, and I posted the picture, and my best friend Gina sent this back to me. After a month and a half, the difference was so drastic that I did what any normal human being would do, and I sent it to a national newspaper. I really did send it to a national newspaper. A good friend of mine is the creative director at You Magazine, and I sent it to her and offered to write about quitting drinking in lockdown. They agreed, but they required that I speak to a doctor. So I was going to go into this doctor, and I was going to charm him, and I'm going to tell him that I'm going to be the American exceptionalist who fixed her alcohol problem. He told me I would die if I kept drinking the way I was drinking. Game over. No recalibration, no moderation. This was my lot. I announced that I was a non-drinker to 3 million You Magazine readers on August of 2020. So what next? What am I going to do with all this time? Oh my God, there was so much time. What was I going to do with all this time? I had seen a couple of friends complete a Couch to 5K, and I kind of figured if I was able to deal with my darkest dependency that I thought was going to control the rest of my life, what else could I take on? My initial investment was doubling in return, so what else was I going to do? Couch to 5K. I hadn't so much as run for a bus in 15 years. Did not think it possible, but I'm competitive. Let's give it a go. The first day, absolute disaster. I lost my phone for an hour and a half. My dog was crying because she thought I was running away from her. And I cried because I couldn't run for 90 seconds without heaving. I didn't finish the first day. And the next day, I put my phone in a zipped pocket. I left the dog at home, and I've gone for a run almost every other day since. I don't love running. I still don't love running. Everyone's like, oh, the euphoria. But I love how it sets me up for the rest of the day. I love that it reminds me that I'm making a daily investment in my own self. I had this little tiny superhero cape that was starting to grow, and I was thinking about running more than I was thinking about drinking. So what next? I'm a Virgo, bit of an overachiever, and so I was trying to figure out, what can I do next? What's the next accomplishment? What is the next trophy? I was doing pretty well with quieting that 2 a.m. voice with my not drinking and my running, and then I saw a picture of myself side on. I felt huge. I felt exposed. I felt as big as a house. And I know I don't look like that now, but I had spent 25 years of my life overweight. There's so much wrapped up in women's weight, but I got into the age of 42 without ever having been on a diet. I pretended I was one of the boys. Cheesesteaks, beers, wings, everything. And to be honest, there's no point in dieting when you're drinking the amount I was drinking. But when I was in my 20s, I was a size 14, but I was a voluptuous, happy size 14. I loved my body. I loved my curves. I was often the sexiest woman in the room just because I thought I was the sexiest woman in the room. English women don't usually have that, thinking that or say it out loud. And I loved myself, and I loved my body, and I loved my friends, and I loved on it because it was real. Until I avoided the pictures of my 40th birthday. Until I started to avoid mirrors. But this was time. I was going all in to deal with 25 years of weight. I was going to do the decision trees, the portion size, the soup, the CBT about why you eat. Understanding that I'm not hungry when I'm just feeling tired or touchy and down, and that food and booze won't fill the hole left by my mother. Nothing will, but sitting with that grief and sitting with that is powerful. The weight came off. When I was a month away from hitting my weight goal target, the hungry rumbling in my stomach was replaced with something else. Fear, rage, and anger. And it couldn't be ignored. It was fire in my belly. On March 3rd of 2021, Sarah Everard went missing. I, along with the entire nation, was closely following the news and hoping she would be found. The police were telling women the only way we could keep ourselves alive was to stay inside our own homes. We were already in a lockdown. On March 9th, Wayne Couzens, a serving police officer, was arrested. And on the 10th of March, tragically, Sarah's remains were found. I was devastated, and there was impotent grief and rage. I was isolated. I hadn't hugged my best friend. I hadn't seen anybody. I hadn't been with other women who were feeling how I was feeling. I felt the deep need to be with those women. Furthermore, I felt the need to provide that space. For Sarah and for all women that have suffered violence at the hands of men, I felt the need to bring us together and have somewhere where we could grieve safely and securely, to reclaim these streets. I tweeted on Wednesday, March 9th, that I was going to put on a vigil for Sarah Everard. I was put in touch with some local women who were doing the same. We joined forces, and Reclaim These Streets was born. My 2 a.m. voice was absolutely silent. Many of you will know what happened next. We proactively approached the police to tell them about our plans, and the police forbade us from going ahead because of COVID restrictions. The same COVID restrictions that Wayne Couzens used to abduct, rape, and murder Sarah. We sued the police. We took them to high court for our human right to assemble on that Friday evening. The judge told us that we needed to go away. The police needed to give us the parameters within which we could go ahead. We had to follow them, and he sent us off on our way. While we were meeting with Scotland Yard, they sent out a press release that it would be illegal and threatened us with £10,000 in fines each as organizers and prosecution under the Serious Crimes Act. We were forced to cancel and fundraise instead. Many women still attended the night of the vigil. I, with everyone I know, watched in horror as police manhandled and aggressively policed women and arrested women at a protest about a police officer that killed a young woman. I don't know that I'll ever forget that night. Little update, good little update. Last month, we were vindicated in high court that found that the police had violated our human rights by forbidding the vigil. It took us a long year of fighting them, but we fought the power and we won. The night that we donated the 550,000 pounds that we raised for violence against women and girls organizations, I tweeted that I would not have had the emotional capacity or stamina to have done the work if I was still drinking. More than that, I wouldn't have had the courage to put myself forward if I wasn't in the absolute best shape of my life. And I don't mean physically. I mean, I channeled my anger. I didn't drink it away. I listened to my agency. Not only did I know that I was the person that could do this, I was the person that had to do this. My superhero cape, it grew and was proudly flying. I reclaimed these streets and I reclaimed my life. I spent the last year campaigning for women's safety daily. I now live a life that my mom would be hugely proud of. But more importantly than my mom, I wake up proud of myself. I make the daily decision not to drink alcohol, to eat well, to run. I'm still not very good at sleeping. I'll never regret investing in myself. Yes, there's going to be moments. The grief is still there. I still miss my mom every day. But it's counterbalanced with so much more. And I'm ready for the future. I'm excited for the future and whatever it's going to throw at me. What about you? Are you ready to invest in yourself? I've got faith in your conviction. Do you?